They were seen as little more than clever apes, crude, chaotic, and barely civilized enough to join the stars. For centuries, humanity had been a tolerated outlier within the celestial concord, a union of refined worlds bound by reason and order. The elites viewed Earth's squabbling politics and slapdash technology with thinly veiled contempt, their diplomats patronized, their soldiers ignored. Yet when war came, and the polished might of the Concord faltered, it was these very outcasts, reckless, raw, and underestimated, who answered the call. It was said among the stars that the humans were scavengers and pirates, petty and easily distracted by the temptations of the moment. Their ships, motley and haphazard, hardly inspired confidence among the polished fleets of their Concord brethren. The Concord's own peacekeepers were regularly forced to intervene in disputes that spilled over from countless minor conflicts between human factions. A bitter irony given that humans were the sole species known to wage war against themselves with such uninhibited zeal. When Concord emissaries arrived to restore order, the humans invariably complained that justice was arbitrarily meted out, that their sovereign rights had been trampled by an overbearing interstellar authority. In the eyes of the Concord, their very existence was an affront to the ideals of galactic unity. Even as the Concord prided itself on its collective wisdom and order, a dark shadow had been looming on its periphery, a threat in the shape of the Zithrax. A force of ruthless ambition and disorganized might, the Zithrax were more than a match for the Concord in cunning, but less so in discipline. Their art of warfare was crude, and their strategic grasp tenuous at best. Yet when the Zithrax suddenly erupted into a full-scale assault, decimating 3 worlds of the Concord, a tragic loss that struck one of the budding members of the galactic community, the stage was set for an unprecedented call to arms. The Concord, in a gesture meant to rally the disparate members of its union, issued a conscription call to its forces. Conventional wisdom held that only the established governments and official military organizations would answer the summons. Instead, the response was as chaotic as it was unexpected. In the very first day, 56 vessels answered the call. Out of these, a staggering 47 were not from Concord headquarters or disciplined fleets. They were human crews, manning outlaw pirate ships, civilian outposts, and even a stationary scrap station that had, in an act of uncharacteristic audacity, volunteered its services. The initial reaction from the Concord's command was a mixture of amusement and exasperation. They had long believed that the humans were incapable of organized, deliberate action. Their best qualities were assumed to be reckless bravado rather than disciplined might. Even as the tally of human ships, 193 in all, rolled in, with only 75 representing the official military and the rest a wild assortment of scrap and piracy, the leaders of the Concord were not expecting a decisive contribution to the war effort. Other species, such as the Grell, a pacifist race whose singular world barely produced a fraction of a proper combat fleet, managed to muster only a few hundred vessels. In comparison, the human turnout was seen as a clumsy, misdirected enthusiasm, a collection of mismatched, ill-prepared crafts that would, at best, be relegated to the role of bounty hunters and privateers, harassing Zithrax vessels in a low-risk, opportunistic manner. What followed on the battlefields, however, shattered all preconceived notions. The Concord's repair docks and medical bays soon became synonymous with human misadventures. Every port became a gallery of human misfortune, ships battered repeatedly by one-sided, lopsided skirmishes, hulls pockmarked with damage that stubbornly clustered around the aft sections, and crews who, despite grievous wounds, would stubbornly refuse to rest. These were not disciplined soldiers who nursed their wounds under strict orders. They were human, reckless, impetuous, and driven by a ferocious desire to prove themselves, even if it meant hobbling back into battle on crutches or with makeshift bandages barely holding together. At first glance, their performance was laughable. The Concord analysts counted losses. Half of the human fleet was destroyed, casualties piled up, and not a single bounty was claimed. In a war where every enemy vessel destroyed should have yielded a reward, the human inability, or refusal, to claim their prizes was seen as nothing short of an embarrassing dereliction of duty. Many within the Concorde decried them as nothing more than a nuisance, a ragtag collection of belligerents whose chaotic enthusiasm only drained precious repair and medical resources. Had it not been for these very losses, the humans might have faced a formal reprimand or an additional tax designed to recoup the costs of their continuous debacles. Then, as the war raged on with its customary lethargic pace, most interstellar conflicts dragging on for decades, punctuated by stalemates and incremental gains, a startling twist emerged from the shattered debris of battle. The Zithrax, in their hubris, began to reference a mysterious force in their communications. In encrypted radio dispatches and hurried audio messages captured from the battlefield, one word recurred over and over: Night Stalkers. At first, the term seemed to be nothing more than a code name, a grim joke among the Zithrax themselves to designate any particularly formidable enemy vessel. Yet, as the intercepted transmissions began to accumulate, it became evident that Night Stalkers was not a mere metaphor for a few high-priority targets. Instead, it was a signal, a boogeyman of sorts, designating a force that could single-handedly dismantle Zithrax defenses with surgical precision. Within the Concorde's own ranks, the revelation of the Night Stalkers sparked both incredulity and grudging admiration. Rumors spread like wildfire across starports and military barracks. At one forward base, a grizzled veteran boasted, "They say our vessel crippled the Zithrax shield array at Eridan Prime. That could only have been one of those Night Stalker runs." At another outpost, a young soldier chimed in, "I heard our fighter slipped in under enemy radar and struck down their command center before vanishing into the void. Pure Night Stalker brilliance." The myth of the Night Stalkers grew, woven from fragments of battlefield reports and half-remembered exploits. Yet no one could reconcile this legendary force with the humans they had so long scorned. The decisive moment arrived during what would later be recounted as one of the most daring maneuvers in interstellar warfare. In a heavily contested sector of space, a decrypted video relay from a Zithrax surveillance post began to play, a grainy, nearly indecipherable feed captured by a security camera. For 15 seconds, viewers saw a series of Zithrax destroyers under construction in a massive orbital hangar. Then chaos erupted. Construction teams scattered in terror as a single, unheralded vessel streaked past, unleashing a torrent of plasma fire that ignited the hangar in a blaze of destruction. The feed ended abruptly, leaving Concorde intelligence officers baffled and intrigued. A second video soon followed, a longer, more detailed account of a skirmish unfolding over a barren moon. In this transmission, a Zithrax destroyer was locked in a deadly pursuit with a much smaller, agile ship. The engagement was brutal and relentless. The larger vessel fired with unyielding precision, its shots tearing at the hull of the smaller craft. Amidst the cacophony of combat chatter and the roar of energy weapons, a single word rang out over the channels: Night Stalker. The smaller ship, battered and nearly bereft of power, executed a maneuver that defied both logic and physics. With its shields down and systems on the brink of failure, it jettisoned a payload, a fusion core rigged with unstable energy. The core, a ticking time bomb in the midst of a ferocious engagement, exploded mere meters from the pursuing destroyer. In a moment of audacious defiance, the ship, using its remaining energy reserves, spun around to face its enemy, fired a single, low-powered shot, and then resumed its escape. In that fleeting reversal, the camera caught a clear profile of the vessel, a ship unmistakably human in design. As the pieces fell into place, it became evident that the legendary Night Stalkers were none other than the humans themselves. the very forces that had been derided as chaotic, undisciplined, and reckless had been waging a silent, shadow war against the Zithrax. With a blend of bravado and desperate ingenuity, they had turned the tide in key battles, executing hit-and-run strikes against strategic targets that even the Concorde's polished fleets could not replicate. In the ensuing months, as the Concorde scrambled to piece together a coherent picture of the war, the true scale of the human contribution began to emerge. Decrypted communications and recovered video logs painted a picture of a people who had not only met the Zithrax on their own terms, but had done so with a ferocity and resourcefulness that defied every expectation. While the official records of the Concorde boasted of meticulous military campaigns and long, drawn-out sieges, it was the unsung exploits of the human fighters that had in fact crippled enemy supply lines, dismantled planetary defenses, and even forced the Zithrax High Command to reconsider their strategy. The human fleet, though battered and diminished, losing nearly half of its combat vessels in the process, had managed to deliver blows that reverberated throughout the conflict. They struck without waiting for the heavy hand of Concorde reinforcements, preferring instead to act as a singular, unpredictable force. Their operations were executed with a blend of reckless abandon and tactical genius. In one instance, a human cruiser, patched together from salvaged parts and jury-rigged systems, boarded a Zithrax flagship, disabled its command module, and then, with impeccable timing, detonated its own cargo hold loaded with volatile materials, forcing the enemy to retreat in confusion. Every successful raid was an act of defiance against the dismissive arrogance of the Celestial Concorde, and yet, despite their crucial contributions, the humans remained stubbornly unrecognized by the interstellar establishment. When Concorde envoys finally arrived on Earth, a planet now bristling with scars of war and the quiet pride of its people, the offer of accolades, official medals, and even a grand monument was met with polite, almost imperceptible refusal. The humans had never sought validation from the elites who had once ridiculed them. Their pride was not in awards or honors, but in the unyielding, selfless determination that had saved countless lives on both sides of the conflict. The war eventually drew to a close with the reluctant surrender of the Zithrax. The negotiated armistice came after one final desperate campaign to reclaim the shattered remains of the Concorde's worlds, a campaign that, despite its strategic blunders, underscored the indispensability of human valor. The Zithrax, known for their ruthless disregard for tradition, capitulated only after witnessing the relentless, almost mythic persistence of the human assault. They signed their surrender with trembling hands, their representatives forced to attend the ceremonial proceedings alongside a human diplomat whose very presence defied expectations. In an act of final, bitter defiance, the Zithrax envoy spat at the human delegate as he passed, a gesture that, rather than sullying the human honor, only underscored the stark difference between contemptible arrogance and quiet, resolute dignity. For the Concorde, it was a moment of painful reckoning. The established narratives, polished with bureaucratic precision and self-congratulatory rhetoric, had long omitted the crucial role played by the humans. Instead, they had celebrated the grand maneuvers of their official fleets and the slow, methodical recapture of strategic positions. Yet behind every success story lay the hidden hand of the human warriors. Fierce, unorthodox combatants who had acted as both saboteurs and liberators. They had dismantled enemy fortifications, neutralized supply convoys, and even sabotaged the enemy's own communications, all without ever seeking glory or monetary reward. They had been the silent storm, the unpredictable force that had ensured the Concorde's survival. In the years that followed, as historians began to unravel the tangled threads of the war, the myth of the Night Stalkers took on a new meaning. No longer was it a term whispered in fear or mockery. It became a badge of honor, Across the galaxy, soldiers recounted tales of those daring raids with awe. In hidden corners of spaceports and military bases, veterans proudly recounted the exploits of human brigades that had blazed trails through enemy lines, leaving behind scorched wreckage and shattered command structures in their wake. And yet, even as their legend grew, the humans remained steadfastly unpretentious. When the Concorde finally extended a formal gesture of gratitude, a public declaration of recognition accompanied by a substantial gift and even a monument dedicated to the memory of the worlds that had fallen, they turned it down with quiet dignity. The monument, erected on the capital planet and inscribed with words meant to honor sacrifice and valor, was seen by many as a paltry token. The humans preferred to remember their lost worlds in their own way, carrying within their hearts the solemn promise that no accolade could ever replace the deep scars of war or the honor of their deeds. Thus ended a conflict that, on its surface, had been defined by bureaucratic maneuvers and the measured pace of galactic warfare. Beneath that veneer, however, lay a story of unexpected courage, a tale of a species that had long been dismissed as little more than unruly scavengers, yet had risen to embody the very essence of defiant, selfless valor. The Celestial Concorde's official records would forever bear the mark of their own slow, methodical campaigns. But in the hidden annals of interstellar history, it was the story of the human warriors, the ones who fought not for bounty or glory, but for the sheer, unyielding instinct to stand against tyranny, that shone brightest. In the final reckoning, the humans proved that valor was not the exclusive domain of those born into nobility, or trained in the rigid doctrines of a grand military machine. Their methods, unpredictable and sometimes crude, carried the spark of ingenuity and the fierce independence of a people who had learned, through countless failures and hard-won victories, that sometimes the only way to survive the storm of war was to ride it headlong with unbridled passion. We knew them once only as a nuisance, a ragtag, impulsive band of pruts and petty fighters, an embarrassing appendage of a greater interstellar body. But as the dust settled and the Zithrax faded into the annals of history, the truth became undeniable. The human spirit, unyielding, indomitable, and steeped in a legacy of scars and triumphs, had not only survived the crucible of war, but had emerged as a beacon of audacity in a universe that too often celebrated measured caution over the brilliance of the unexpected. In time, the legend of these human warriors would echo across star systems, whispered in reverence and retold around flickering campfires on distant forgotten worlds. They were not the refined and orderly soldiers of the Concorde, nor the cold strategists of more civilized races. They were simply humans, flawed, fiercely independent, and profoundly courageous. And in that truth lay the greatest lesson of all, that the most extraordinary acts of heroism often come not from the polished ranks of the elite, but from those who dare to fight with all the grit and passion their fragile humanity can muster. And so, even as the Concorde continued to compose its grand narratives of cosmic order, a quiet revolution endured in the hearts of countless beings. A reminder that in the chaos of war, honor is not bestowed by titles or medals, but earned on the battlefield by those who risk everything for the sake of a higher cause. This is the chronicle of a war that was as much about defying expectations as it was about survival. A saga in which humanity, with all its imperfections and audacity, rewrote the rules of engagement and forged a legacy that would burn in the annals of interstellar history for generations to come.